My own son looked me in the eyes and told a room full of lawyers that I was mentally incompetent and needed to surrender control of my estate. His evidence? I'd forgotten his birthday and misplaced my glasses twice in 1 week. I didn't argue or break down in tears. Instead, I calmly requested a comprehensive neurological evaluation from the city's most respected specialist. When the doctor revealed his findings 3 weeks later, the shock on my son's face was worth every penny of the inheritance I immediately removed him from. My journey to reclaim my dignity began the moment I saw his true intentions. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined my retirement years would unfold like this. After 4 decades as a high school principal, I had settled into a comfortable routine in the Victorian home my late husband Robert and I had lovingly restored. My garden was flourishing. My book club met every Thursday, and I'd finally found time to volunteer at the local literacy center 3 days a week. At 65, I felt I had earned this peaceful chapter of my life. The morning had begun like any other. I woke at 6. Old habits from my principal days died hard, prepared my usual breakfast of oatmeal with fresh berries, and settled on the porch with the crossword puzzle. My cat Fitzgerald, named after my favorite author, curled against my ankles as birds flitted between the bird feeders Robert had installed years ago. The spring air carried the scent of lilacs from the bushes lining our property. The house itself was my pride and joy. 3 stories of history nestled on Maple Avenue, with stained glass windows that caught the morning light, and a wraparound porch where Robert and I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. We'd purchased it as a fixer-upper 30 years ago when property in the historic district was still affordable. Now it was worth nearly 7 figures, something my son Gregory seemed increasingly interested in. I spent the afternoon pruning roses in the garden, careful with each cut as Robert had taught me. Always at a 45-degree angle, Eleanor, he'd say, his surgeon's hands demonstrating with precision. I missed those hands. 5 years a widow, and some days the absence still felt raw. I was reaching for a particularly stubborn branch when I heard the distinctive purr of a luxury engine. Gregory's black SUV pulled into the driveway unexpectedly, tires crunching over the gravel with an impatient sound. He visited rarely these days, perhaps once every few months, usually when he needed something. At 42, he had his father's height, and my mother's sharp features. But somewhere along the way, he'd developed a coldness neither of us had possessed. "Mom!" he called from the garden gate, not bothering to come help with the heavy pruning shears I was struggling with. "We need to talk about your situation." I remember feeling a flicker of irritation at the word situation. I had no situation. I had a life. A good one. "Hello to you too, Gregory," I replied, setting down my gardening tools. "I wasn't expecting you today." He glanced at his gold watch, the one Robert had given him for his law school graduation, before he'd switched to finance, and "I can't stay long. Melissa has a charity function tonight, and I need to be back in the city by 6. Melissa was his 3rd wife, young, beautiful, and perpetually photographed in expensive clothing at various galas and fundraisers. I'd met her exactly twice. The first time she'd asked if the pearls I wore were real or costume, and the second time she'd spent the entire dinner texting under the table. "Well then," I said, removing my gardening gloves, "why don't we have some iced tea on the porch? I made a fresh batch this morning." As I poured the tea into Robert's old crystal glasses, the ones with tiny etched sailboats that had been a wedding gift, Gregory pulled out his phone and began scrolling through emails. I noticed how his once warm brown eyes barely lifted to acknowledge me, how his mouth was set in a permanent line of impatience. I wondered when my son had become a stranger. "Mom," he finally said, setting his phone down with deliberate slowness. "I've been talking with some elder care specialists. I'm concerned about you living alone in this big house." I took a slow sip of my tea. the sweetness suddenly cloying. "I've been living alone for 5 years since your father passed, Gregory. I'm managing quite well." He leaned forward, adopting what I recognized as his business voice, the same tone he used when explaining investment opportunities to clients at his financial management firm. "You forgot my birthday last month," he said, as if presenting evidence at a trial. I set my glass down. "I didn't forget your birthday. I called you the next day because you were in Aspen on your actual birthday. You didn't answer, so I left a message. And last time I visited, you couldn't find your glasses for nearly an hour," he continued, ignoring my explanation. "Then there was the incident with the stove." "What incident with the stove?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Exactly," he said, pointing at me as if I'd just proven his point. "You left it on overnight. Mrs. Peterson next door mentioned it when I called to check on you." Mrs. Peterson? My nosy neighbor who had tried to buy my house at half its value after Robert died, claiming she'd take it off my hands since it would be too much for a widow. Of course, she and Gregory would be in contact. "Gregory," I said carefully, "I have never left the stove on overnight in my life. Mrs. Peterson must be confused." He shook his head with exaggerated sympathy. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Mom, memory issues, confusion. It happens to everyone eventually." Something in his tone made me pause. This wasn't concern. This was strategy. I'd spent 40 years reading students and parents, recognizing when someone was trying to manipulate a situation. My son wasn't worried about my well-being. He was setting a stage. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden chill I felt. Gregory pulled a glossy brochure from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between us. "Evergreen Estates. It's a beautiful assisted living community just outside the city. They have memory care specialists, social activities, gourmet dining." "I don't need assisted living," I interrupted, not even glancing at the brochure. "Mom, be reasonable," he sighed, the way he used to when asking for a later curfew as a teenager. "This house is too much for you to maintain. The property taxes alone must be eating through Dad's pension. It makes more sense to sell while the market is strong, move somewhere with proper care, and protect your assets." There it was. Protect your assets. The real reason for this sudden concern about my stove and my glasses. "My finances are perfectly in order," I replied. "Your father and I made sure of that." Gregory's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Actually, I've been reviewing Dad's estate planning. There are some concerning gaps in your long-term care provisions. As your only child, I feel responsible for making sure you're taken care of properly." "How thoughtful," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "And I suppose selling this house and moving me into Evergreen Estates would resolve those concerning gaps?" He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but recovered quickly. "It would free up capital that could be properly managed to ensure your care for the rest of your life. I've already spoken with a real estate agent about getting a valuation on the property." I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. Robert and I had built our life in this house. We'd raised Gregory here, celebrated holidays, mourned losses, marked the passages of our time together within these walls. I remembered Gregory's 10th birthday party in the backyard, the graduation photos on the staircase, the Christmas mornings by the living room fireplace. And now my son was ready to liquidate it all without so much as consulting me. "You seem to have thought of everything," I said quietly. He mistook my calm for acquiescence. "I have. In fact, I've scheduled a meeting with our family attorney next week to discuss updating your power of attorney arrangements. Given your recent episodes, it might be time to consider a more comprehensive management approach to your affairs." In that moment, looking at my son's calculated expression, I realized this wasn't a spontaneous visit. This wasn't concern. This was the first move in a carefully orchestrated plan to take control of my life, my home, and my assets. And he had. severely underestimated his mother. I watched Gregory's car disappear down the driveway, the glossy Evergreen Estates brochure still sitting untouched on the porch table. For several minutes, I remained in my chair, my tea turning cold as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn. The audacity of it all. My son had waltzed in ready to dismantle my life without a second thought. Yet somewhere beneath my indignation was a painful thread of recognition. Gregory had always been calculating, even as a child. The signs had been there all along, signs I had chosen to ignore or explain away. As twilight settled over the garden, my mind drifted back, 30 years to when Gregory was just 12. Robert had received a substantial inheritance after his mother passed. Nothing extravagant, but enough to make a difference. We debated between renovating our kitchen or taking a family trip to Europe. "Let's show Gregory the world," Robert had suggested. "The kitchen can wait." We planned a month-long adventure through England, France, and Italy. I still remember Gregory's expression when we told him. Not excitement, but calculation. "How much is the inheritance?" he'd asked, his first and only question. At the time, Robert and I exchanged amused glances. "He's just curious," Robert said later. "Probably wants to make sure we have enough for souvenirs." But there had been other moments. When Gregory was 16, he'd manipulated his elderly grandmother, my mother, into changing her will to leave him her vintage jewelry collection instead of his cousin Sarah, who had always admired it. Grandmother should keep her valuables. In the family, he'd argued. Sarah will just marry and change her name. Then there was his first marriage at 25 to Diane, the daughter of Robert's colleague at the hospital. She came from money, old money, and their wedding had been featured in the society pages. The marriage lasted exactly 4 years and 3 months, just long enough for Gregory to establish connections with her family's investment circle. The divorce came swiftly after Diane's father retired. His second wife, Lauren, was a real estate attorney who helped him purchase his first investment properties. That marriage dissolved after 7 years, once Gregory's portfolio was substantial enough to stand on its own. I rose from the porch chair and walked into the house, the screen door closing softly behind me. The evening light filtered through, the stained glass panels above the front door, casting jewel-toned patterns across the hardwood floors that Robert had painstakingly restored. Each plank had been sanded by hand, each imperfection embraced as character rather than flaw. "A house breathes history, Eleanor," he'd say as he worked. "We're just temporary stewards." In the study, I unlocked the antique roll-top desk that had belonged to Robert's father. Inside were decades of careful documentation, property deeds, investment portfolios, insurance policies, and the trust documents Robert and I had established after consulting multiple estate attorneys. Robert, ever the meticulous surgeon, had insisted we prepare for every contingency. "The problem with money," he'd told me once, "is that it reveals character rather than building it." How prophetic those words seemed now as I spread the documents across the desk. Our will was clear. The house and the majority of our assets would pass to Gregory upon my death, with specific amounts set aside for charitable causes we believed in. We had established a modest trust for Gregory's education and early career, which he had depleted by 30. The remainder of our assets had specific provisions and protections. Robert had insisted on a clause that I had almost forgotten until now. In the event that any beneficiary contested the will or attempted to declare me incompetent, their inheritance would be automatically redirected to a list of alternative beneficiaries, primarily educational institutions and medical research, foundations that Robert had supported throughout his career. My fingers traced the clause, feeling a bittersweet certainty that Robert had foreseen something like this. Not specifically Gregory's betrayal, perhaps, but the potential for complications after he was gone. He had always been more clear-eyed about our son than I had been willing to be. I remembered a conversation we'd had after Gregory's second divorce. We were sitting in the garden, the same roses blooming that I had been tending today. "He uses people, Eleanor," Robert had said quietly. "I don't know where we went wrong." "He's just ambitious," I had defended. "He'll settle down eventually." Robert's eyes had held mine with gentle sadness. "It's more than ambition. He sees relationships as transactions. I've watched him calculate the value of people since he was a teenager." I had changed the subject, unwilling to see the truth about our only child. Robert never brought it up again, but he had quietly updated our estate plan the following month. Now, as I organized the documents and returned them to the desk, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't helpless in this situation. I had resources, knowledge, and most importantly, my faculties fully intact despite Gregory's claims to the contrary. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Margaret Sullivan speaking." "Margaret, it's Eleanor Winters. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Eleanor!" Her voice warmed immediately. "It's wonderful to hear from you. It's never too late for old friends." Margaret had been my closest friend since our teaching days, before I became principal, and she went on to become a respected elder law attorney. We had drifted apart somewhat after Robert's death, my fault more than hers, as I had retreated into grief for a time, but I knew she was someone I could trust implicitly. "I need your advice," I said simply. "Professional advice." There was a brief pause. "This sounds serious." "It is. Gregory paid me a visit today. He's making moves to declare me incompetent and take control of my estate." Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible. "That conniving little—" She caught herself. "Sorry, Eleanor, but I never did like the way he looked at your house after Robert passed." "I know," I said softly. "I should have seen this coming." "What's his evidence of incompetence?" I couldn't help but give a short, bitter laugh. "Apparently, I forgot his birthday and misplaced my glasses. Oh, and the neighbor claims I left the stove on overnight, which I most certainly did not." "That's absurd," Margaret said firmly. "But unfortunately, these cases can get complicated if the petitioner is persistent and has financial resources, which Gregory certainly does." "What should I do?" I asked. "First, we document your mental competence. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by Dr. Harriet Chen. She's the best neurologist in the state and serves as an expert witness in contested competency cases. Her assessment will carry significant weight." I felt a flutter of anxiety. "What if she finds something wrong?" Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Eleanor, do you believe you're experiencing cognitive decline?" I thought about my daily routine, managing my household, volunteering, keeping up with my reading, maintaining detailed garden records. I balanced my own checkbook, paid my bills on time, and remembered the birthdays of every former colleague and student who had kept in touch. "No," I said with certainty. "I'm as sharp as I've ever been." "Then we have nothing to worry about from an honest evaluation. But we need to be proactive. Gregory has already started building his case. We need to build yours." We talked for another hour, formulating a plan. Margaret would come over tomorrow with her paralegal to document the condition of my home, my daily routines, and my financial management. She would contact Dr. Chen for an urgent evaluation and would review all my legal documents. "And Eleanor," she added before we hung up, "start keeping a detailed journal. Document everything: your activities, your conversations with Gregory, your meal planning, medication management, everything. If this goes to court, that journal will be valuable evidence." After we hung up, I went upstairs to my bedroom and opened the bedside drawer. Inside was the leather-bound journal Robert had given me on our last anniversary together. "For your thoughts," the inscription read, "which have always been the greatest treasure of my life." I had never written in it, unable to face the blank pages after he was gone. Now I opened it and began to write, my penmanship as neat and precise as it had been when I taught English before moving into administration. Today, "My son tried to steal my life," I wrote. "He will not succeed." I documented the visit in detail: the time Gregory arrived, his exact words, the brochure he'd brought, the meeting he'd scheduled without my consent. I described my home, my routines, my activities. I made lists of my medications, and when I took them, the books I was currently reading, the names of my book club members, and the schedule of my volunteer work. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. I placed the journal back in the drawer and prepared for bed, following the same routine I'd maintained for decades. As I turned out the light, I caught sight of a photograph on my dresser: Robert and Gregory at his college graduation, both smiling broadly. Robert's arm was around our son's shoulders, his expression brimming with pride and hope. "I'm sorry, Robert," I whispered into the darkness. "I'll take care of this. I promise." As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself planning my next moves, with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt since my days running a school of 1,200 students and 100 staff members. Gregory had made a critical error in his calculations. He had forgotten who I was before I was his mother. I had spent 40 years managing crises, mediating conflicts, and standing firm against intimidation tactics from everyone from angry parents to budget-slashing administrators. I had rebuilt my life after losing my beloved husband. I was not going to be steamrolled by my own son. Tomorrow would be the first day of my counteroffensive, and I intended to win. The morning of Gregory's scheduled meeting with the family attorney arrived with an unseasonable chill. I had spent the week meticulously preparing with Margaret's guidance, gathering documents, undergoing Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation, and documenting every aspect of my daily life in the journal. I dressed with particular care that morning: a tailored navy suit I had worn to board meetings during my tenure as principal, pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, and the vintage Cartier watch Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. My appearance would be the first line of defense against Gregory's claims of deterioration. Margaret picked me up promptly at 9. Her silver hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she wore a charcoal pantsuit that exuded authority. Her paralegal, a young woman named Amira, sat in the back seat with a leather portfolio and tablet. "Ready for this?" Margaret asked as we pulled away from my home. I gazed back at the Victorian house, its morning shadows stretching across the lawn like protective fingers. "More than ready." We arrived at the offices of Harrington and Associates 15 minutes early, another strategic decision. Gregory would find us waiting, composed and prepared, rather than rushing in after him. Harrison Harrington had been our family attorney for decades, handling everything from Robert's medical practice incorporation to our estate planning. He was in his 70s now, but showed no signs of retiring, his mind still razor-sharp beneath his crown of white hair. He greeted me warmly in the reception area. "Eleanor, it's good to see you. It's been too long." "Thank you, Harrison. This is my attorney, Margaret Sullivan." His eyebrows rose slightly at the word attorney, but he extended his hand cordially. Of course, Margaret's reputation precedes her, though I wasn't aware we were having a legal consultation today. Gregory simply mentioned discussing some updates to your care planning. "I imagine there are several things Gregory failed to mention," Margaret replied smoothly. Harrison's expression flickered with concern. "I see. Well, let's use the main conference room. There will be plenty of space for all of us." We followed him down a hallway lined with tasteful landscape paintings to a large room dominated by a polished mahogany table. Amira set up her tablet and arranged documents with quiet efficiency. At precisely 10 o'clock, the receptionist showed Gregory into the room. He stopped short in the doorway when he saw Margaret and Amira, his confident smile faltering momentarily, before he recovered. "Mom, I didn't realize you were bringing guests." His tone suggested I had committed some faux pas. "This is Margaret Sullivan, my attorney," I said calmly, "and her paralegal, Amira Hashemi." Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly as he took the seat across from us. I wasn't aware you felt you needed legal representation for a family discussion. And I wasn't aware that you had scheduled this meeting to discuss having me declared incompetent. I countered, keeping my voice steady. Harrison looked startled. That's not how this meeting was presented to me. Gregory leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of practiced concern. That's a mischaracterization, Mom. I'm worried about your well-being, that's all. You've been showing signs of confusion. I thought we should discuss options for your care and protection. Let's be direct, Margaret interjected. Mrs. Winters has reason to believe you intend to petition for guardianship and control of her estate based on alleged cognitive decline. Is that accurate? Gregory shot her an irritated glance before turning to Harrison. My mother is exhibiting classic early signs of dementia. She's becoming forgetful, confused, and has had several concerning incidents. I'm trying to ensure her safety and financial security before things deteriorate further. What specific incidents are you referring to? Harrison asked, reaching for a legal pad. She forgot my birthday last month. Gregory began. I called you the day after your actual birthday because you were in Aspen, I interrupted. You didn't answer, so I left a message, which you apparently never listened to. Gregory continued as if I hadn't spoken. She lost her glasses for hours and couldn't remember where she put them. She left the stove on overnight. Her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, confirmed this. She's been paying bills twice sometimes, other times not at all. That's simply not true, I said firmly. Mom, denial is part of the condition, Gregory said with exaggerated patience. You wouldn't necessarily be aware of these lapses. Margaret opened her portfolio. Mrs. Winters has been keeping meticulous financial records. There are no instances of duplicate payments or missed bills. She slid a folder toward Harrison. Her checkbook is balanced to the penny, and all her accounts are in perfect order. Harrison examined the documents, his expression thoughtful. These appear to be in excellent order, Gregory. More organized than my own records, I might add. Anyone can have a good day, Gregory dismissed. The point is, there's a pattern of decline that needs to be addressed proactively. In that case, Margaret said, producing another folder, you'll be interested in the results of Mrs. Winters' recent neurological evaluation. Gregory's head snapped up. What evaluation? I consulted with Dr. Harriet Chen, the head of neurology at Metropolitan Medical Center, on Tuesday, I explained. She conducted a comprehensive cognitive assessment. Gregory's face flushed. You had no right to do that without consulting me. I have every right to seek medical care independently, I replied, fighting to keep my voice from trembling with anger. I am a fully competent adult. What were the results? Harrison asked, accepting the folder from Margaret. Dr. Chen found absolutely no evidence of cognitive impairment, Margaret stated. In fact, Mrs. Winters scored in the superior range on several cognitive measures, particularly verbal reasoning and executive function. I believe you'll find Dr. Chen's reputation as an expert in the field is unimpeachable. Harrison reviewed the assessment, nodding slowly. These results are indeed impressive, Eleanor. Far better than most people your age. Or my age, for that matter. Gregory's jaw clenched. One evaluation doesn't rule out early-stage dementia. There could be good days and bad days. Dr. Chen specifically addressed that possibility. Margaret countered. She conducted multiple assessments over 2 days, at different times, to account for any variability. The results were consistently excellent. The conference room fell silent. I watched my son's face as he realized his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. The momentary flash of frustration in his eyes confirmed everything I had feared about his intentions. Mrs. Peterson clearly told me about the stove incident, Gregory insisted, changing tactics, and there have been other neighbors with concerns. Interesting you should mention that, Margaret said. She nodded to Amira, who produced yet another document. We took the liberty of speaking with Mrs. Winters's neighbors. All of them, not just Mrs. Peterson. None of them, including Mrs. Peterson's husband, have observed any concerning behaviors. In fact, they all described Mrs. Winters as an active, engaged member of the community. Mrs. Peterson's husband specifically mentioned that his wife has been trying to convince them to move for years and has expressed repeated interest in purchasing Mrs. Winters' property, Amira added, speaking for the first time. He seemed quite embarrassed by the situation and apologized for his wife's behavior. Gregory's face darkened. This is absurd. I'm trying to protect my mother's best interests. Are you? I asked quietly. Or are you trying to protect your inheritance? How dare you? He sputtered, but the flash of guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. Perhaps we should discuss the actual purpose of your concern, Margaret suggested. You've mentioned the house several times to your mother. You've already contacted a real estate agent about valuation. You've researched assisted living facilities, all without your mother's knowledge or consent. Harrison looked troubled. Gregory, if this is about the estate— It's not, Gregory insisted, his composure cracking. But since you bring it up, yes, I am concerned about how the assets are being managed. The house is sitting there, a valuable asset that's underutilized and deteriorating. It makes financial sense to liquidate it before the market shifts. The house is not deteriorating, I said firmly. I've maintained it meticulously, as Robert would have wanted. Dad would have wanted practical decisions made, Gregory argued, not emotional ones. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. I leaned forward, looking my son directly in the eyes. Your father, I said evenly, would be ashamed of what you're doing right now. Gregory recoiled as if I'd slapped him. In the heavy silence that followed, Harrison cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented, I cannot, in good conscience, support any petition for guardianship or competency evaluation, he said. Eleanor appears to be managing her affairs admirably. In my professional opinion, there are no grounds for the actions you're suggesting, Gregory. Gregory stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This isn't over. Mom clearly needs help, whether she recognizes it or not. If you won't help me protect her, I'll find someone who will. Before you pursue that course of action, Margaret interjected, you should be aware that Mrs. Winters has instructed me to file for a restraining order if you attempt to file any guardianship petition without substantial new evidence of incapacity. Furthermore, you should review the terms of your parents' will, specifically the clause regarding challenges to Mrs. Winters' competency. Gregory's face paled. What clause? Harrison pulled out a copy of the will, turning to the relevant section. Your father included a provision that any beneficiary who contests the will or attempts to have Eleanor declared incompetent without clear medical justification forfeits their entire inheritance. The assets would instead go to the alternative beneficiaries listed, primarily charitable organizations. That's not legal, Gregory protested, though he sounded uncertain. I assure you it is, Harrison replied. Your father and I drafted it, carefully, and such clauses have been upheld repeatedly in state courts. Gregory looked at me, genuine shock in his eyes. You would disinherit your only son? Your own flesh and blood? I wouldn't, I said softly. You would disinherit yourself through your actions. Everything you've done. The lies, the manipulation, the attempts to take control of my life. Those are your choices, Gregory. And choices have consequences. For a moment, I glimpsed something in his expression. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first flicker of recognition that he had miscalculated severely. This meeting is over, he said finally, gathering his coat. I'll be in touch. After he stormed out, the room remained silent for several seconds. Harrison shook his head slowly. Eleanor, I had no idea. I wouldn't have agreed to this meeting if I'd known what Gregory was planning. I know, Harrison. It's not your fault. What will you do now? He asked. I exchanged glances with Margaret before answering. I'm going to protect myself. And unfortunately, that means protecting myself from my own son. As we drove back to my house, Margaret reviewed next steps, updating my advance directives, adding additional safeguards to my accounts, and preparing for the possibility that Gregory might try again with a different attorney. He's not going to give up easily, she warned. Men like Gregory don't accept defeat gracefully. I gazed out the window at the spring streets, tulips pushing through the soil in neat garden beds. No, they don't. But neither do women like me. When we arrived at my house, I noticed something that made my heart sink. Gregory's black SUV was parked in my driveway, and the front door was ajar. He has a key, I whispered. I never thought. To change the locks. Margaret put a hand on my arm. Wait here, I'll call the police. No, I said firmly. This is my home. I'm not hiding from my own son. We approached cautiously. As we reached the porch, I heard sounds from upstairs, drawers opening and closing, footsteps moving between rooms. Gregory, I called out, my voice ringing through the house. What do you think you're doing? The footsteps paused, then hurried to the top of the stairs. Gregory appeared, clutching a small wooden box I recognized immediately. It contained my mother's jewelry, pieces I had planned to pass down to any grandchildren. You're trespassing, Margaret stated flatly. Put that down and leave, or we will call the police. This is family property, Gregory argued, though he looked cornered. I'm just securing heirlooms. You mean stealing them? I corrected. Those pieces belong to me, and I decide when and to whom they are passed down. Something shifted in his expression then, the final transformation from the son I thought I knew to someone unrecognizable. His features hardened, his eyes became cold. You've made your choice, he said, setting down the jewelry box but not approaching the stairs. Don't expect me to be there when you finally do need help. I never expected that, I replied quietly. Not anymore. After he brushed past us and drove away, Margaret helped me check the house. Nothing appeared to be missing beyond what Gregory had been holding when we interrupted him. We need to change the locks immediately, she said, and install a security system. I nodded, feeling a bone-deep weariness settle over me. The confrontation at Harrison's office had been difficult, but this violation of my home, this attempt to take pieces of my history, felt like the final severance of whatever bond had remained between Gregory and me. I'll make the calls, I said, straightening my shoulders. No one is taking anything from me without my consent. Not my home, not my possessions, and certainly not my dignity. As I watched Margaret drive away, promising to return the next day with a locksmith and security consultant, I felt a strange mixture of grief and resolve. The son I had raised was truly gone, perhaps had never truly been who I thought he was. But I was still here, still standing, still fighting. This wasn't the retirement I had envisioned, but I was determined to reclaim it on my own terms. The new locks were installed by dusk. The locksmith, a kind-faced man named Eduardo who had worked on the original restoration of the house years ago, refused to accept full payment. For you, Mrs. Winters, a discount, he insisted. Your husband helped my mother when she needed surgery but couldn't afford it. I never forget. After he left, I walked through each room of my house, touching familiar surfaces, reacquainting myself with the space as if I were seeing it through new eyes. The home that had been my sanctuary now felt slightly alien, tainted by Gregory's invasion. In the upstairs hallway, I paused before the family photographs that lined the wall. Gregory's progression from chubby-cheeked toddler to solemn-faced graduate. Had there always been that calculating look in his eyes, or was I projecting my current knowledge onto the past? I removed each frame methodically, stacking them in a cardboard box I retrieved from the attic. Not discarding them, I wasn't ready for that finality, but removing them from daily view. Their absence left rectangular patches of unfaded wallpaper, like ghosts on the wall. In the master bedroom, I opened the closet where I still kept a few of Robert's things. His favorite sweater, the the tweed jacket with leather elbow patches that he wore when reading, the polished wooden box containing his cufflinks and tie pins. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the sweater to my face. It had long since lost his scent, but the soft wool still carried the memory of his shoulders. "What would you do, Robert?" I whispered to the empty room. "How did we raise a son who could do this?" The house offered no answers, only the familiar creak of the old radiator coming to life against the evening chill. I carefully replaced Robert's sweater and closed the closet door. Whatever guidance I needed now would have to come from within. I made myself a simple dinner: toast with avocado, and a soft-boiled egg, a glass of the Pinot Noir Robert and I had always enjoyed. I sat at the kitchen table where our family had shared thousands of meals, where Gregory had once proudly shown us his report cards, where we had planned family vacations and celebrated achievements. The kitchen had always been the heart of our home. Now it felt hollow, the empty chair across from me a stark reminder of all I had lost. First Robert, and now in a different way, Gregory. After dinner, I found myself drawn to Robert's study. Unlike the rest of the house, which I had gradually updated over the years, the study remained frozen in time. His medical journals still lined the bookshelves, his desk calendar still open to the month he died. His reading glasses still perched on top of the medical text he'd been consulting. I sank into his leather chair, my fingers tracing the worn armrests where his hands had rested. The room smelled faintly of the sandalwood aftershave he had used for decades. On an impulse, I opened the lower drawer of his desk, the one where he had kept personal papers. Beneath a stack of birthday cards and handwritten notes was a leather-bound journal I had never seen before. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted it out. Robert had never mentioned keeping a journal. The cover was soft with age and use, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder in my husband's private thoughts, but something compelled me to open it. The first entry was dated 25 years ago, when Gregory was in high school. "I'm concerned about Gregory. His teacher called today. He was caught cheating on an exam. When confronted, he showed no remorse, only frustration at being caught. Eleanor thinks it's just typical teenage rebellion, but I sense something deeper, a fundamental disconnect between actions and consequences. How do you teach empathy to someone who seems to lack the capacity for it?" I turned the pages slowly, reading Robert's private observations about our son over the years. His writing was measured, clinical at times, as if he were documenting symptoms rather than family dynamics. But beneath the careful prose ran a current of parental anguish. Gregory manipulated his grandmother today. I watched him calculatingly change his approach until he found the exact words that would get her to give him what he wanted. Eleanor didn't see it, or chose not to. Sometimes I think she has constructed an image of our son that bears little resemblance to reality. Can I blame her? What mother wants to acknowledge such qualities in her child? And later, after Gregory's first divorce, Diane came to see me at the hospital today. She wanted me to know the divorce wasn't about growing apart, as Gregory claimed. She discovered he had been systematically transferring their joint assets to private accounts. When confronted, he told her coldly that she should have protected herself better. I gave her the name of a good attorney. I couldn't bring myself to tell Eleanor. It would break her heart to know what our son has become. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. Robert had seen everything, had carried this burden of knowledge alone to protect me. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before his unexpected heart attack. "I've updated our will with Harrison. Eleanor doesn't know the full extent of the protective clauses I've added. I hope they're never needed. But Gregory has been asking increasingly direct questions about our estate planning. The look in his eyes when we discussed the house's appreciated value chilled me to the bone. I cannot leave Eleanor vulnerable when I'm gone. I can only hope that I'm wrong about our son, that there's still a chance for him to become the man we raised him to be rather than the man he seems determined to become. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. Robert had known. All those years he had recognized what I had refused to see. He had protected me even beyond his death, anticipating Gregory's actions with heartbreaking accuracy. For hours, I sat in Robert's chair, the journal in my lap, confronting the truth I had spent decades avoiding. My son, the baby I had held. In my arms, the child whose scrapes I had bandaged, the young man I had sent into the world with such hope, was not merely misguided or temporarily lost. There was a fundamental absence at his core, a void where compassion and familial love should reside. As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, a strange calm settled over me. The grief was still there, the sense of failure as a parent, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a profound sense of clarity and purpose. I was not responsible for the choices Gregory had made as an adult. I had loved him, raised him, with values, provided every opportunity. Whatever had turned him toward manipulation and greed was beyond my control. What remained within my control was how I responded now. I would not spend my remaining years in grief over what could not be changed. I would not allow Gregory's betrayal to diminish the life I had built. Most importantly, I would honor Robert's final act of protection by ensuring that Gregory never gained control of what we had created together. The next morning, I called Margaret before the sun had fully risen. "I need to make some changes," said when she answered, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "Significant ones. To my will, to my living trust, to everything." "What kind of changes?" she asked, fully alert despite the early hour. "I want to remove Gregory as beneficiary entirely," I said. "Not just the contingent clause if he challenges my competency, but completely. I want to establish a foundation, in Robert's name instead, for medical education scholarships and support for elderly patients without family advocates." There was a brief pause. "That's a major decision, Eleanor. Are you certain?" "I found Robert's journal last night," I explained. "He saw what I couldn't, or wouldn't, see about our son. He tried to protect me. Now I need to protect his legacy from being squandered by someone who never appreciated what his father stood for." "I understand," Margaret said softly. "I'll come over this afternoon. We'll draft everything properly." After we hung up, I went downstairs and made coffee, watching the garden awaken as the morning light spilled across the dew-covered roses. The hummingbirds Robert had so loved darted among the feeders he had placed strategically around the yard. For the first time in decades, I felt truly awake. Not just going through the motions of living, but fully present in my life. The grief over Gregory's betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath my breastbone, but it no longer dominated my consciousness. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. Gregory had miscalculated severely. He had seen me as a fragile elderly woman, an obstacle to his inheritance, a problem to be managed. He had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, who I was at my core. Before I was a mother, before I was Robert's wife, I had been Eleanor Winters, the first woman principal in the district, a leader who had transformed a failing school into one of the state's top performers, a woman who had faced down budget committees and school boards and angry parents without flinching. That woman had never really disappeared. She had simply been dormant, subsumed by grief and the quiet routines of retirement. But now, facing this ultimate betrayal, she was awakening again, clear-eyed, resolute, and utterly determined. I spent the morning sorting through papers, creating a comprehensive inventory of assets, accounts, and personal possessions. When Margaret arrived at 1 o'clock, I had already prepared a detailed list of changes I wanted to make. "I'm impressed," she said, surveying the organized stacks on the dining room table. "Most clients are more emotional at this stage." "I spent 40 years making difficult decisions based on facts rather than feelings," I replied. "Old habits die hard." We worked through the afternoon, drafting new documents, discussing legal strategies, and creating the framework for the Robert Winters Medical Advocacy Foundation. As the day progressed, I felt a growing sense of liberation with each change we made. "There's something else I want to do," I said as Margaret prepared to leave. "I want to have a formal neurological assessment every 6 months, with the results documented and filed with both you and Harrison. If there ever is any legitimate decline in my cognition, I want it properly documented and addressed according to my wishes, not Gregory's." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's an excellent idea. It creates an ongoing record of your competency that would be nearly impossible to challenge." After she left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. The weight I had carried for days, the shock, the hurt, the betrayal, hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more manageable, more purposeful. My phone rang as darkness fell. I tensed when I saw Gregory's name on the screen, but answered anyway. "Hello, Gregory." "Mom." His voice was cool, controlled. "I think we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Things got out of hand." "Yes, they did," I agreed calmly. "Breaking into my home to steal family heirlooms was certainly out of hand," he sighed. "I wasn't stealing anything. I was securing items of sentimental value. Without my permission. In my home. After I explicitly denied your request." "Look," he said, his tone shifting to the cajoling one he had used since childhood when trying to get his way. "We both said things we didn't mean. Let's start fresh. Why don't I come over tomorrow? We can talk face to face." "No, Gregory. I don't think that's a good idea." "Mom, be reasonable," he pressed. "We're family. We should be able to work through disagreements." "This wasn't a disagreement," I said quietly. "It was an attempted theft of my home, my autonomy, and my dignity. Those aren't things I'm willing to negotiate away, not even for family." "So what? You're just cutting me off. Your only son?" His voice hardened. "After everything Dad and you built for our family?" "That's exactly it, Gregory. What your father built was meant to support our family, not just your ambitions. He worked his entire life to help others, to heal them, to make their lives better. The idea that his legacy would be used to fund your third divorce or another investment scheme would break his heart." "You don't mean that," he said, but I heard the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "I do," I replied simply. "I've spent the day with my attorney making changes to my will and trust. The house and the majority of our assets will be going to the foundation we're establishing in your father's name. I suggest you make your own financial arrangements for the future." There was a long silence, then a cold laugh. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't disinherit your only child." "I already have." I was surprised by how steady my voice remained. "The paperwork will be finalized tomorrow." "This isn't over," he said, his tone suddenly venomous. "You'll regret this." "No, Gregory, I won't. What I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner. What I regret is that you never understood what truly mattered to your father and me. It was never about the money or the house. It was about building a life of meaning and integrity." I ended the call before he could respond, placing the phone on the table beside me with a steady hand. The night air had grown cool, but I didn't move inside. Instead, I wrapped the shawl Robert had brought me from Scotland more tightly around my shoulders and gazed up at the emerging stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Gregory would likely escalate his efforts, perhaps try new tactics to gain control. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt prepared, not just legally, but emotionally and spiritually. The fear and confusion had burned away, leaving behind a crystalline clarity about what I needed to do. This house, this garden, this life Robert and I had built together, they were worth protecting. Not just as assets, but as testaments to what we had valued: beauty, sanctuary, generosity, legacy. I would not allow them to be dismantled by greed or entitlement. As I finally rose to go inside, I paused to touch one of Robert's roses, its petals velvety against my fingertips in the darkness. "I understand now," I whispered, as if he could hear me. "And I'm ready." 3 days passed without word from Gregory. The silence was more unnerving than outright confrontation might have been, like the breathless quiet before a storm. I knew my son well enough to know he wasn't simply accepting defeat and moving on. He was regrouping, reassessing, planning his next attack. I used the respite to fortify my position. The new security system was installed, cameras monitoring the perimeter of the house, motion sensors on all doors and windows, a direct line to the monitoring company programmed into my phone. The installers worked efficiently, explaining each feature with patience when I asked questions. "You live alone, Mrs. Winters?" one of them asked as he mounted a camera that overlooked the garden. "Yes," I replied. "My husband passed several years ago." He nodded sympathetically. "Smart to get this set up. Too many people targeting seniors these days. Scammers, thieves, sometimes even family members trying to take advantage." If only he knew. Margaret had been true to her word. The paperwork disinheriting Gregory was finalized and filed with remarkable speed. Harrison had been professionally neutral when I informed him of my decision, though I detected a hint of approval behind his measured response. "Robert would have supported this," was all he said as he notarized the documents. The foundation, the Robert Winters Medical Advocacy Foundation, was now officially established, with a mission to provide medical advocacy for elderly patients, without family support and scholarships for medical students committed to geriatric care. I had appointed a board of trustees consisting of Margaret, Harrison, 2 of Robert's former colleagues from the hospital, and myself. Each night, I updated my journal with meticulous detail, not just documenting my activities and mental state, but recording my reflections on what was happening and the decisions I was making. If Gregory ever did succeed in challenging my competency, there would be an undeniable record of my clarity and reasoning. On the 4th morning, as I was deadheading roses in the garden, Dorothy from next door called over the fence. Unlike Mrs. Peterson on the other side, Dorothy had been a true friend since we'd moved in decades ago. Now in her 70s, she was still spry and sharp-minded, with a former investigative journalist's eye for detail and skepticism. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I've noticed you've had quite a few visitors lately. The locksmith, those security people. And now I see cameras going up." I hesitated, torn between privacy and the practical need to have allies aware of the situation. Dorothy had been Robert's friend as much as mine. They had spent countless evenings debating politics and current events over glasses of scotch, while her late husband and I shook our heads at their intensity. "Would you like to come over for coffee?" I asked. "There's something I could use your perspective on." 20 minutes later, we sat at my kitchen table, mugs of coffee between us, as I told her everything. Gregory's ambush, the meeting with Harrison, the discovery of Robert's journal, my decision to remove Gregory from my will. Dorothy listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to outrage. "That little weasel," she muttered when I finished. "I never trusted him even when he was a teenager. Too smooth by half." "I should have seen it sooner," I admitted. "Robert did." "Robert saw everything," Dorothy said with a sad smile. "It's why he was such a brilliant diagnostician. He could spot the truth beneath the symptoms." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What can I do to help?" "Just knowing you're next door is a comfort," I said. "But if you notice anything unusual, Gregory's car, strangers watching the house, anything that seems off, would you let me know?" "Of course." Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "But we should be more proactive. I still have contacts at the paper. If Gregory tries anything public, like a guardianship petition, we could make sure the whole story comes out. A respected retired principal being targeted by her financially motivated son wouldn't play well in the court of public opinion. I hadn't considered the power of public exposure. Gregory was always intensely concerned with appearances, with how others perceived him. It was why he drove the right car, joined the right clubs, married women who enhanced his image. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I said. But it's good to know it's an option. After Dorothy left, I spent the afternoon in Robert's study, reviewing financial records. I had always managed our household finances, but Robert had handled the investments and larger financial planning. After his death, I had educated myself on these matters, but had eventually engaged a financial advisor recommended by Harrison. Now I pored over statements and reports with new scrutiny. Had Gregory somehow manipulated these accounts already? Were there vulnerabilities I hadn't identified? The doorbell rang as the afternoon light was beginning to fade. I checked the new security monitor in the kitchen before opening the door. A young woman in a crisp pantsuit stood on the porch, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. "Mrs. Winters?" she inquired with a professional smile. "I'm Vanessa Clark from Adult Protective Services. We've received a concern about your welfare. May I come in?" A chill ran through me despite the warm spring day. Gregory had escalated faster than I'd anticipated. "May I see your identification, please?" I asked, keeping the door partially closed. She produced a badge and ID card, which I examined carefully. "Thank you," I said, opening the door wider. "Please come in. I've been expecting something like this, though not quite so soon." If my calm response surprised her, she didn't show it. She followed me to the living room, declining my offer of tea or coffee. "Mrs. Winters, we received a report expressing concern about your living conditions and possible financial exploitation," she began, her tone neutral. "It's our obligation to investigate all such reports." "I understand completely," I replied. "And who filed this report?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information." "It was my son, Gregory Winters," I said with certainty. "And I can save us both some time. He's attempting to have me declared incompetent so he can gain control of my assets. I have documentation of his efforts, including statements from my attorney, my doctor, and our family lawyer." Ms. Clark's professional demeanor cracked slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "You seem very prepared for this conversation." "Unfortunately, I've had to become prepared. My son has already tried to convince our family attorney that I'm experiencing cognitive decline. When that failed, he attempted to remove family heirlooms from my home without permission. Now, it seems he's trying a different approach." I rose and retrieved the folder Margaret had prepared for precisely this scenario, containing Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation, statements from neighbors, documentation of my financial management, and a letter from Harrison explaining the situation from his perspective. Ms. Clark reviewed the materials with growing interest. "This is unusually thorough," she commented. "I was a school principal for 40 years, I explained. Documentation was second nature long before this situation arose." "I see." She closed the folder. "Mrs. Winters, would you mind if I looked around your home? It's standard procedure for these visits." "Of course," I agreed readily. "I'll give you a tour." I showed her through the house, the immaculate kitchen with its organized meal planning calendar on the refrigerator, the tidy living room with books, neatly arranged on shelves, the meticulously maintained garden visible through the back windows. In the study, I pointed out my financial records and the journal I'd been keeping. "You're welcome to look at any of it," I offered. "My grocery lists, my appointment calendar, my medication management system, it's all here and in order." Ms. Clark made notes as we walked, her initial professional detachment gradually warming. "Your home is beautifully maintained," she remarked as we returned to the living room, "and you clearly have systems in place for managing your daily affairs." "I've had a lot of practice," I said simply. Organization was essential when running a school. She closed her notebook and met my gaze directly. "Mrs. Winters, based on my observations and the documentation you've provided, I don't see any evidence of self-neglect or cognitive impairment that would warrant protective intervention. Quite the opposite, in fact. Relief washed through me. Thank you. However, she continued, her expression turning serious, the fact that someone filed this report means I will need to complete an assessment. It's procedural, but it will create an official record of your capacity and living conditions. Given the situation you've described with your son, having such a record might actually be beneficial to you. I nodded, understanding the implications. If Gregory tried to claim I was declining, there would be an official assessment contradicting him. Would it be possible to complete that assessment today? I asked. Ms. Clark checked her watch. I have time if you do. For the next hour, she conducted a formal assessment, asking about my daily routines, testing my awareness of current events, observing as I demonstrated my medication management system, and evaluating my physical mobility around the house. Mrs. Winters, she said as she prepared to leave, based on my assessment, you're functioning independently at a high level. I'll be filing my report accordingly. Is there anything else you'd like me to know? I considered the question carefully. Only that I fear this won't be the end of it. My son has significant financial resources and connections. I'm concerned about what he might try next. She nodded gravely. I understand. I'm going to flag your file as a potential case of attempted exploitation. If any further reports come in, they'll be seen in that context. After Ms. Clark left, I called Margaret immediately to update her on this new development. He's escalating. She agreed, concern evident in her voice. Adult Protective Services is a serious step. He's trying to build a paper trail. But it backfired, I pointed out. The assessment will actually support my case. This time, Margaret cautioned, but Gregory won't stop here. Have you considered my suggestion about moving temporarily, just until we get through this phase? I had considered it. Margaret had offered her lake house as a refuge, a place where Gregory wouldn't think to look for me immediately, giving us time to strengthen my legal protections without the constant pressure of his machinations. I won't be driven from my home, I said firmly. That's exactly what he wants. To make me appear unstable or vulnerable, running would play into his hands. It's not running, Eleanor. It's strategic retreat, Margaret argued. Sometimes the smartest move isn't standing your ground, but choosing the battlefield. Her words stayed with me as I prepared dinner that evening. Was I being stubborn rather than strategic? The security system would alert me to break-ins, but it couldn't protect me from Gregory's legal maneuvers or from the emotional toll of this constant vigilance. As I washed the dishes afterward, gazing out at the garden where twilight was gathering, the decision crystallized in my mind. I wouldn't permanently leave the home Robert and I had built together, but a temporary tactical retreat made sense. I could use the time to finalize the foundation structure, complete the transfer of assets, and prepare for whatever Gregory might attempt next. I would go to Margaret's lake house, but not as someone fleeing in defeat. I would go as a general establishing a command center away from the front lines, a position of strength, not weakness. I called Margaret back and told her my decision. I'll leave tomorrow, I said. But I need you to help me with something first. I want to lay a trap. What kind of trap? She asked, curiosity evident in her voice. The kind that will give Gregory exactly what he thinks he wants, and reveal his true intentions beyond any possibility of denial. As I outlined my plan, I felt a strange sense of calm purpose. For years, I had been Gregory's mother first and foremost, viewing him through the forgiving lens of maternal love. Now, I was seeing him clearly as the adversary he had chosen to become. This wasn't just about protecting my assets or even my autonomy. It was about standing firm against manipulation and greed, about honoring Robert's legacy, and about reclaiming my own identity beyond motherhood. Gregory had declared war on the wrong woman. He had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, that beneath the gardening gloves and reading glasses was someone who had built a career on strategic thinking and principled leadership. Tomorrow, I would begin the counteroffensive. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting with one hand tied behind my back by maternal guilt or misplaced hope. This time, I would be fighting to win. Margaret's lake house was a modernist structure of glass and cedar, perched on a wooded hillside overlooking the water. From the wraparound deck, I could see miles of shimmering blue stretching toward distant mountains, the afternoon sun casting diamond-like sparkles across the gentle waves. The air smelled of pine and clean water, so different from my gardens, perfumed roses and rich soil. "The guest suite is all yours," Margaret said, carrying my suitcase down the hallway. "It has its own entrance, so you can come and go as you please. The freezer is stocked, Wi-Fi password is on the fridge, and my office is set up for our work." I followed her into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows framing a view of the lake. A desk positioned to capture the vista held a computer, printer, and neatly organized legal pads. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely appreciative. "Robert would have loved this view." "He helped me find this place," Margaret replied with a soft smile. "Came up here with me when I was house hunting after my divorce. Said I needed perspective and peace after the legal bloodbath." I turned to her in surprise. "He never mentioned that." "He wouldn't have," she said. "Robert was good at keeping confidences." She squeezed my shoulder gently. "Get settled in. We have a strategy session with Harrison via video conference at 4. Alone in the guest suite, I unpacked methodically, hanging clothes in the cedar closet, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom, placing Robert's journal and my own on the bedside table. The simple rituals of organization helped ground me in this unfamiliar space. My phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. The motion sensor in my garden had been triggered. I opened the app to see Gregory walking up the front path, his posture tense and determined. He rang the doorbell, repeatedly, then pounded on the door when no one answered. After a few minutes, he made a call. To me, I assumed, though I had blocked his number after our last conversation. I watched as he circled the house, peering through windows, testing the door to the sunroom which had always been Gregory's illicit entrance point as a teenager sneaking in past curfew. Finding it locked, he kicked at the base in frustration, leaving a scuff mark on the freshly painted wood. "Well, that didn't take long," Margaret commented from the doorway, where she had been watching over my shoulder. "Good thing we left when we did." "He looks angry," I observed, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the sharp gestures as he made. "Another call. He is angry. His easy target just disappeared." Margaret checked her watch. "Dorothy should be heading over soon for her daily garden check. That should give him something to think about." Right on cue, Dorothy's petite figure appeared on the screen, walking briskly along the sidewalk toward my house, a straw hat shading her face from the afternoon sun. Gregory turned at the sound of her approaching footsteps, his stance immediately shifting to one of casual politeness. Though the security cameras didn't capture audio, I could imagine the conversation from their body language. Dorothy's raised eyebrows and folded arms as Gregory offered some explanation. Her pointed gesture toward the security camera he'd failed to notice. His sudden stillness as he registered its presence. "She's perfect," Margaret chuckled. "Academy Award-worthy performance." We had briefed Dorothy thoroughly on her role. She was to be vague about my whereabouts. Yes, I was traveling. No, she didn't know exactly where or for how long. Yes, she was checking on the house daily and reporting any disturbances directly to me. Gregory left shortly after Dorothy's arrival, casting one last frustrated glance at the house before driving away. The first obstacle in his path had been established. He couldn't access the house to stage any evidence of my supposed decline. The video conference with Harrison began promptly at 4. His silver-haired image appeared on Margaret's large monitor, bookshelves visible behind him in his home office. "Eleanor, good to see you looking well," he greeted me. "I assume you're safely settled at Margaret's hideaway." "I am," I confirmed, though I've already had the dubious pleasure of watching Gregory try to break into my house via the security cameras. Harrison shook his head. He's becoming reckless. That's actually our first topic of discussion. Gregory came to see me this morning. My stomach tightened. What did he want? To discuss filing for emergency guardianship. He claims you've become paranoid, installing excessive security systems, making irrational changes to your estate planning, and now disappearing. Without notice. That was fast, Margaret commented. Did he file the petition? Not yet. I advised strongly against it, pointing out that Dr. Chen's evaluation and the Adult Protective Services assessment would make such a petition look frivolous at best, malicious at worst. I reminded him of the clause in Robert's will regarding challenges to your competency. Did that deter him? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Harrison sighed. Temporarily. But he mentioned speaking with another attorney about a second opinion. He's not giving up, Eleanor. He's just regrouping. Then neither can we, I said firmly. What's our next move? For the next hour, we outlined a comprehensive strategy. Harrison would monitor court filings for any guardianship petitions. Margaret would accelerate the transfer of assets to the foundation. I would undergo another neurological evaluation with a different specialist, building an even stronger record of my cognitive health. There's one more thing, Harrison said as our meeting was winding down. Gregory mentioned something that concerned me. He said he's been in contact with some of your former colleagues from the school district, gathering statements about changes they've observed in your behavior in recent years. A cold feeling settled in my chest. That's impossible. I'm still in regular contact with most of my former administrators. No one has mentioned Gregory reaching out. He may be exaggerating his evidence, Margaret suggested. Or approaching people you're not as close to. Or simply lying, Harrison added. But we should prepare for the possibility that he's building a case with witnesses willing to support his claims. That night, sleep eluded me despite the comfortable bed and soothing sounds of the lake lapping at the shore below. I lay awake, mentally cataloging everyone from my professional life who might be vulnerable to Gregory's manipulation. Had I seemed forgetful at the retired educator's luncheon last month? Had I missed any social cues during book club? Were there moments of normal aging, a misplaced name, a forgotten appointment that could be twisted into something sinister? By dawn, I had formulated a plan. I rose early, made coffee in Margaret's sleek kitchen, and settled at the desk in my room with a legal pad and my phone. One by one, I called my closest former colleagues, my vice principal of 15 years, the curriculum director who had been my right hand, the school counselor who had become a dear friend. I was direct about the situation, explaining Gregory's claims and my concerns. The reactions ranged from outrage to stunned disbelief. Eleanor, this is absurd, said Richard, my former vice principal. I just had dinner with you last month. You remembered details about my grandchildren that I'd forgotten I'd told you. Has Gregory contacted you? I asked each of them. Most said no, but Judith, the former English department chair, hesitated. He called me last week, she admitted reluctantly. Said he was concerned about you, that you'd been behaving erratically. He asked if I'd noticed any changes when we met for coffee in February. What did you tell him? I asked, heart pounding. I told him you were sharper than most of us 20 years your junior, she replied firmly. And that if he was truly concerned, he should be talking to you directly, not gathering gossip behind your back. He didn't like that much. By mid-morning, I had spoken with 12 former colleagues. None had provided statements to Gregory, though 3 had been contacted by him. All were now alerted to the situation and firmly in my corner. That's a good start, Margaret said when I joined her for a late breakfast on the deck. But Gregory wouldn't have mentioned witnesses to Harrison unless he had someone lined up. But who? I wondered, spreading homemade blackberry jam on toast. I've spoken with everyone I work closely with. Margaret's expression turned thoughtful. What about people with grievances? Anyone who might hold a grudge from your principal? Days? I considered this. In 40 years of educational leadership, I had made difficult decisions that weren't always popular, denied tenure to underperforming teachers, implemented controversial policies, stood firm during budget cuts and redistricting. Battles. There were always disgruntled parents or staff, I admitted. But that was years ago. Would anyone still care enough to get involved in something like this? Gregory would only need 1 or 2 people willing to say what he wants to hear, Margaret pointed out. And money can be persuasive for those with flexible ethics. The thought that Gregory might be paying for false testimony against me was sickening, but not entirely surprising, given how far he had already gone. Just before noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Warily, I answered. Mrs. Winters? This is Dr. Philip Monroe. I believe you have an appointment with me next Tuesday for a neurological evaluation? Yes, that's correct, I confirmed, wondering why he was calling. I'm afraid I need to cancel that appointment, he said, his tone clipped and professional. My schedule has become unexpectedly full. I see, I replied slowly. Would it be possible to reschedule? Unfortunately, I won't be taking new patients for the foreseeable future. My receptionist can provide referrals to other specialists if you'd like. As he spoke, I heard the distinctive ping of an incoming email on my phone. I put Dr. Monroe on speaker and checked it quickly. A message from Harrison with the subject line, Urgent, Monroe Connection. Dr. Monroe, I said carefully, did my son Gregory contact you recently? The pause before his answer was telling. I'm not at liberty to discuss other communications, Mrs. Winters. I apologize for the inconvenience. After he hung up, I opened Harrison's email to find what I already suspected. Dr. Monroe's wife served on the board of a charitable foundation where Gregory had recently become a significant donor. He's blocking my access to medical evaluation, I told Margaret, handing her my phone, trying to prevent me from building more evidence of my competency. Margaret read the email, her expression darkening. This is getting ugly. He's using his connections to close doors. Can he do that? Isn't there some ethical violation? Dr. Monroe was careful not to explicitly refuse to treat you because of Gregory. He just suddenly became unavailable. It's unethical, but difficult to prove. I paced the deck, frustration building. So what now? If Gregory can influence specialists not to see me, we go bigger, Margaret said decisively. The University Medical Center's neurology department. They have an entire team specializing in cognitive assessment for legal cases. Gregory can't influence an entire institution. She made several calls, and by mid-afternoon, I had an appointment scheduled for the following week with Dr. Eliza Washington, the department chair herself. They're expediting the process because I explained the legal implications, Margaret explained. And Dr. Washington is intrigued. Apparently, cases of false dementia claims and estate disputes are increasing. She's been gathering data for a paper on the subject. One obstacle navigated, but others quickly emerged. That evening, Dorothy called to report that Mrs. Peterson had been seen taking photographs of my untended garden beds, muttering about neglect and deterioration. She's building a case that you can't maintain your property, Dorothy warned. Should I offer to tend the roses while you're away? Please do, I said gratefully. And take daily photos to document the garden's condition. That their fire next morning brought another unwelcome surprise. Margaret discovered that Gregory had filed a complaint with the State Bar Association against her, alleging undue influence over a vulnerable senior and professional misconduct. It's a nuisance filing, she assured me when I expressed alarm. It won't go anywhere, but it's designed to distract me, bog me down in responding to the complaint instead of helping you. Can he really get away with all this? I asked, bewildered by the escalating attacks. For a while, yes, Margaret replied grimly. He has resources and connections, and he's willing to use them unscrupulously. but every action he takes creates a record, Eleanor. A pattern of harassment and manipulation that will ultimately work against him. Later that day, Harrison called with yet another development. Gregory had petitioned the court for an emergency competency hearing, using a different attorney known for aggressive elder law tactics. He's claiming you've disappeared, possibly due to confusion or manipulation by outside parties, Harrison explained. He's asked for a court-appointed evaluator to assess your competency and for temporary guardianship until you're found. But I haven't disappeared, I protested. I'm simply staying with a friend. That's hardly cause for emergency intervention. Of course it isn't, Harrison agreed. But he's creating a narrative of a vulnerable elderly woman who has suddenly changed her will, cut contact with her only son, installed excessive security, and then vanished. He's trying to paint a picture of cognitive decline or undue influence. What do we do? I asked, fighting rising panic. We respond calmly and thoroughly, Harrison said. I've already filed an objection to the emergency petition, including Dr. Chen's evaluation and the Adult Protective Services assessment. I've also requested that you be allowed to appear at the hearing via video conference rather than in person. Given Gregory's recent behavior, will that be enough? It should delay any emergency action. The judge assigned to the case is Frances Lawton. She's known for being thorough and skeptical of emergency petitions without substantial evidence. But Eleanor, eventually, you will need to appear in court. We can only postpone that confrontation, not avoid it entirely. The obstacles were mounting. Gregory blocking my medical evaluation, filing complaints against my attorney, using his third wife's social connections to spread rumors about my mental state, as Dorothy had reported from her bridge club, and now trying to use the legal system to declare an emergency that didn't exist. Each move was calculated to isolate, undermine, and eventually control me. The son I had raised had become a stranger, using every resource at his disposal to dismantle my independence piece by piece. That night, I stood on Margaret's deck watching moonlight ripple across the dark lake. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the ugliness of Gregory's actions. I felt bone-weary from the constant vigilance, the endless strategizing, the knowledge that my own child was working so diligently to strip me of my dignity and autonomy. For a brief moment, I considered surrender. Would it be easier to give Gregory what he wanted? To let him have the house, the money, control over my life? The thought of peace, even at such a terrible price, was momentarily tempting. Then I remembered Robert's journal entries, his quiet determination to protect me even after he was gone. I thought of the foundation we were creating in his name, the good it could do for vulnerable elderly patients without advocates. I recalled the 40 years I had spent standing firm against bullies and manipulators in my professional life. No. Surrender was not an option. The obstacles Gregory was placing in my path were formidable, but not insurmountable. He had resources and ruthlessness on his side, but I had truth and determination on mine. And unlike Gregory, I wasn't fighting alone. As I turned to go inside, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Garden looking beautiful. Roses in full bloom. The house is waiting for you when you're ready to come home. Home. Yes. This wasn't just about money or property or even principle. It was about my right to live in the home Robert and I had created together, to age with dignity on my own terms, to decide for myself how our legacy would continue. Gregory had underestimated me for the last time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles engineered to break my resolve. But tonight, watching the steadfast stars reflected in the lake's dark waters, I made a silent promise to Robert, to myself, and even to the son who had once been worthy of our love. I would not break. I would not bend. I would stand firm against this storm, no matter how fierce it became. The week leading up to the court hearing unfolded like a carefully orchestrated battle plan. Each morning, Margaret and I reviewed our strategy over coffee, on the deck, adjusting tactics as new information came in from Harrison, Dorothy, and our growing network of allies. The hearing is scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m., Harrison informed us during our daily video conference. Judge Lawton has denied Gregory's request for emergency guardianship, but she's ordered a court-appointed evaluation of your cognitive status. When? I asked, tension coiling in my stomach despite the expected news. Monday. The evaluator is Dr. Samuel Richardson. I've researched him thoroughly. He's well-respected, published extensively on elder cognitive assessment, and has testified as an expert witness in several contested guardianship cases. For which side? Margaret asked, ever the attorney looking for potential bias. Both. He appears genuinely committed to accurate assessment rather than advocating for either side. His reputation is for meticulous neutrality. I nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic. That's what we want. Someone who will see me clearly, not through Gregory's manufactured narrative. The day before the court hearing, Dorothy called with unexpected news. Eleanor, Mrs. Peterson was just taken away in an ambulance. Her husband said she fell in the bathroom. He looked terrible, mentioned something about her medication being mixed up. I felt a pang of concern despite everything. Mrs. Peterson had been Gregory's ally in this ordeal, but she was still a neighbor of many years. Will she be all right? I asked. I think so. But here's the strange part. Mr. Peterson said Gregory had been bringing over her medications recently, organizing them for her. Said he was being so helpful with her memory issues. A chill ran through me. Gregory has been handling her medications? Apparently. Started about 2 weeks ago, right when she began making those statements about your garden being neglected. Relayed this information to Margaret immediately, alarm growing as we connected the dots. He's been manipulating her, Margaret said grimly. Possibly even tampering with her medication to make her confused or susceptible to suggestion. It would explain why her statements about you became increasingly erratic. We need to tell Mr. Peterson, I insisted. And the court, Margaret added. This changes everything. The next morning, I dressed with careful consideration. A navy suit jacket over a cream blouse, pearl earrings, light makeup. We set up at the community center conference room for the video appearance, my documentation neatly arranged before me. At precisely 10 a.m., the virtual courtroom opened on the screen. Judge Frances Lawton sat at the bench, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression alert and evaluative. Gregory and his sharp-featured attorney sat at the plaintiff's table, while Harrison occupied the defense table. As the proceedings began, I noticed Gregory seemed unusually tense, checking his phone repeatedly despite the formal setting. His attorney's opening statement focused on my paranoid behavior and sudden personality changes, claiming these were classic signs of cognitive decline. Harrison countered with the evidence we had gathered, Dr. Chen's and Dr. Washington's, evaluations showing my exceptional cognitive health, the Adult Protective Services assessment finding no evidence of vulnerability, and documentation of Gregory's financial troubles. Your Honor, Harrison continued, we have also recently discovered disturbing evidence suggesting Mr. Winters may have been manipulating a key witness. Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who provided statements about Mrs. Winters's supposed decline, was hospitalized yesterday after a fall. Her husband has reported that Mr. Winters had recently taken over organizing her medications, coinciding with the period when her statements about Mrs. Winters became increasingly confused and negative. Gregory's face drained of color. His attorney immediately objected, calling the allegation speculative and inflammatory. Judge Lawton frowned. Mr. Harrington, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence beyond hearsay? We have Mr. Peterson's statement, which he's willing to provide to the court. We're also requesting an investigation into whether Mrs. Peterson's medication may have been tampered with or improperly administered. The courtroom fell silent. Gregory was whispering urgently to his attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Judge, Lawton turned to me. Mrs. Winters, would you like to address the court? I took a deep breath. centering myself. Your Honor, I never wanted to believe my son would go to such lengths to gain control of my assets. Throughout this ordeal, I've struggled to reconcile the child I raised with the man who has systematically attempted to strip me of my autonomy. If Gregory has indeed manipulated Mrs. Peterson's medication to build a case against me, it represents a shocking escalation beyond financial opportunism to potentially criminal behavior. I paused, meeting Gregory's eyes through the screen. I've spent weeks defending myself against my son's false claims of cognitive decline, but the truth is, I've never been clearer about who I am and what matters to me. I will not surrender my dignity, my home, or my late husband's legacy to someone who has demonstrated such disregard for basic decency. Judge Lawton nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. She turned to Gregory. Mr. Winters, these allegations require investigation. Do you wish to respond? As Gregory leaned toward the microphone, his phone buzzed loudly. He glanced down, and I watched as what little composure he had left crumbled entirely. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, but Gregory shook it off. This is a witch hunt, he snapped, his carefully cultivated mask of concern replaced by raw anger. My mother has been manipulated by her so-called friends into turning against me. I'm her only son, her only family. Everything my parents built should rightfully— He caught himself, but too late. The naked entitlement in his voice hung in the virtual courtroom. Should rightfully what, Mr. Winters? Judge Lawton asked, her tone deceptively mild. Gregory's attorney tried to intervene, but Gregory was unraveling before our eyes. You don't understand what I'm dealing with, he continued, his voice rising. My investment partners are threatening legal action. The SEC is investigating our fund. If I don't cover the shortfall by the end of the month, everything collapses. My mother is sitting on millions while I'm facing financial ruin. His attorney's face went ashen. Judge Lawton's expression hardened. Mr. Winters, she said sharply, are you admitting that your petition for guardianship was motivated by your own financial difficulties rather than genuine concern for your mother's welfare? Gregory's attorney tried desperately to regain control, requesting a brief recess, but Judge Lawton wasn't having it. Your Honor, Harrison interjected, we have evidence that Mr. Winters' investment firm is under federal investigation for potential securities fraud. This contextualizes both his urgent need for funds and his increasingly desperate attempts to gain control of his mother's assets. Judge Lawton's gaze returned to Gregory, who had gone completely still, the fight draining from him as he realized the depth of his self-inflicted damage. In light of Mr. Winters' own statements and the serious allegations regarding witness tampering, I am denying the petition for guardianship evaluation, Judge Lawton declared. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent protective order prohibiting Mr. Winters from contacting Mrs. Winters directly or indirectly except through counsel. I am also referring the medication tampering allegations to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Winters, I apologize for what you've endured. Based on the evidence presented, you are clearly a competent individual who has been subjected to an inappropriate and potentially exploitative guardianship petition. You are free to return to your home and manage your affairs as you see fit. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the painful reality of watching my son's final destruction of our relationship unfold in public. As Gregory was led away by his attorney, the look he cast in my direction wasn't one of remorse, but of cold resentment. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there would be no reconciliation, no healing of this breach. Whatever bond had once existed between us was irrevocably broken. 2 days later, I returned home to my Victorian house on Maple Avenue. Dorothy greeted me with a tearful hug, proudly showing me how she'd kept the roses blooming in my absence. The house seemed to welcome me back, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting familiar patterns across the hardwood floors. In the following weeks, events unfolded with dizzying speed. Gregory's investment firm collapsed amid allegations of fraud and mismanagement. He was indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, with the possibility of witness tampering charges still pending based on the analysis of Mrs. Peterson's medication and blood work. His third wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting that her family's assets be protected from his mounting legal troubles. I watched these developments from a distance, feeling a complex mixture of grief for what might have been and relief that the truth had finally emerged. With Harrison's help, I finalized the establishment of the Robert Winters Medical Advocacy Foundation, dedicating the bulk of our estate to supporting elderly patients without advocates and training medical professionals in recognizing and preventing elder exploitation. 1 month after the court hearing, as I was tending to my garden on a warm afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver approached with a small package, which I opened to find a leather-bound journal with a note from Dr. Washington, the neurologist who had evaluated me. Mrs. Winters, I thought you might like to know that your case has inspired a new research initiative at our center focused on combating fraudulent incapacity claims. Your courage in standing up for your autonomy will help protect countless others. This journal is for the next chapter of your story, one you get to write on your own terms. That evening, I sat on the porch Robert and I had shared for so many years, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor hues. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly at peace. The journal Dr. Washington had sent lay open in my lap, its blank pages full of possibility. I took up a pen and began to write. Today marks 3 months since I discovered my son was trying to have me declared incompetent to steal my assets. It is also 60 days since I took back control of my life, my home, and my future. This is not the story I expected to write at 65, but it is mine, with all its painful truths and hard-won victories. As darkness fell, I continued, writing by the soft porch light, chronicling not just what had happened, but what would happen next. The Foundation's first grants, the speaking engagements I had accepted about elder autonomy, the memoir I was considering that might help others recognize and resist exploitation. The doctor's report had indeed shocked everyone, not with evidence of decline, but with documentation of exceptional cognitive health and resilience. It had become the cornerstone of my defense and, ultimately, the catalyst for Gregory's unraveling. But the true revelation wasn't about my mental capacity. It was about my capacity for strength, for reinvention, for embracing a new purpose when the old one, being Gregory's mother, had come to its painful end. As I closed the journal and prepared to go inside, I glanced once more at the stars emerging above. Robert had always loved stargazing, finding peace in the vastness of the night sky. Even when things seem darkest, he used to say, the stars are still there, guiding us home. Judge Lawton's gaze returned to Gregory, who had gone completely still, the fight draining from him as he realized the depth of his self-inflicted damage. In light of Mr. Winters' own statements and the serious allegations regarding witness tampering, I am denying the petition for guardianship evaluation, Judge Lawton declared. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent protective order prohibiting Mr. Winters from contacting Mrs. Winters directly or indirectly, except through counsel. I am also referring the medication tampering allegations to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Winters, I apologize for what you've endured. Based on the evidence presented, you are clearly a competent individual who has been subjected to an inappropriate and potentially exploitative guardianship petition. You are free to return to your home and manage your affairs as you see fit. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the painful reality of watching my son's final destruction of our relationship unfold in public. As Gregory was led away by his attorney, the look he cast in my direction wasn't one of remorse, but of cold resentment. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there would be no reconciliation, no healing of this breach. Whatever bond had once existed between us was irrevocably broken. 2 days later, I returned home to my Victorian house on Maple Avenue. Dorothy greeted me with a tearful hug, proudly showing me how she'd kept the roses blooming in my absence. The house seemed to welcome me back, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting familiar patterns across the hardwood floors. In the following weeks, events unfolded with dizzying speed. Gregory's investment firm collapsed amid allegations of fraud and mismanagement. He was indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, with the possibility of witness tampering charges still pending based on the analysis of Mrs. Peterson's medication and blood work. His third wife filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting that her family's assets be protected from his mounting legal troubles. I watched these developments from a distance, feeling a complex mixture of grief for what might have been and relief that the truth had finally emerged. With Harrison's help, I finalized the establishment of the Robert Winters Medical Advocacy Foundation, dedicating the bulk of our estate to supporting elderly patients without advocates and training medical professionals in recognizing and preventing elder exploitation. 1 month after the court hearing, as I was tending to my garden on a warm afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver approached with a small package, which I opened to find a leather-bound journal with a note from Dr. Washington, the neurologist who had evaluated me. Mrs. Winters, I thought you might like to know that your case has inspired a new research initiative at our center focused on combating fraudulent incapacity claims. Your courage in standing up for your autonomy will help protect countless others. This journal is for the next chapter of your story, one you get to write on your own terms. That evening, I sat on the porch Robert and I had shared for so many years, watching the sunset paint the sky in watercolor hues. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly at peace. The journal Dr. Washington had sent lay open in my lap, its blank pages full of possibility. I took up a pen and began to write. Today marks 3 months since I discovered my son was trying to have me declared incompetent to steal my assets. It is also 60 days since I took back control of my life, my home, and my future. This is not the story I expected to write at 65, but it is mine, with all its painful truths and hard-won victories. As darkness fell, I continued, writing by the soft porch light, chronicling not just what had happened but what would happen next, the Foundation's first grants, the speaking engagements I had accepted about elder autonomy, the memoir I was considering that might help others recognize and resist exploitation. The doctor's report had indeed shocked everyone, not with evidence of decline, but with documentation of exceptional cognitive health and resilience. It had become the cornerstone of my defense and, ultimately, the catalyst for Gregory's unraveling. But the true revelation wasn't about my mental capacity. It was about my capacity for strength, for reinvention, for embracing a new purpose when the old one, being Gregory's mother, had come to its painful end. As I closed the journal and prepared to go inside, I glanced once more at the stars emerging above. Robert had always loved stargazing, finding peace in the vastness of the night sky. Even when things seem darkest, he used to say, the stars are still there, guiding us home. I had found my way home, not just to this house with its memories and comforts, but to myself, to the woman who existed before and beyond motherhood. A woman of purpose and clarity who had faced the most painful betrayal imaginable and emerged not diminished but enlarged by the experience. Gregory had claimed I had dementia to control my assets. The doctor's report had revealed something else entirely. I was more lucid, more capable, and more determined than anyone, including myself, had realized. And that truth had not only saved my autonomy but opened the door to a new chapter I was now free to write. One word, one day, one choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.